So welcome to Enough Said, die ZEIT's infinite podcast that only ends when our guest decides that enough has been said. With us is, as we mentioned before, one of the most influential American writers of our time, Paul Auster. So welcome, Paul Auster.
Thank you very much.
We've been talking for 30 minutes already because we did the technical setup and we weren't sure if everything's working. So there will be additional material. Maria, our producer, who's also in the room, recorded for our podcast subscribers. Hello, Maria. And with me is also Christoph Arment, the editor, the former editor-in-chief of ZEITmagazin, or actually now he's editorial director, so congrats. And this episode is streamed live on several websites and will be published later if you were asking yourself as a podcast. In total, we have recorded.
Jochen, I was just trying to introduce you.
Ah, thanks.
Just for a second. So the voice you've been hearing for the last couple of minutes is the co-host of Alles Gesagt, Jochen Wegner, the editor of ZEIT Online.
Hi there. Let me just drop the information that we have recorded 172 hours, which is more than 7 days of Enough Said, with the longest interview going for 8 hours, 40 minutes, and the shortest episode running just for 12 minutes. And before Christoph introduces our guest in more detail, let me remind you that you can send feedback to allesgesagt@zeit.de. You can complain if you are making too much noise when eating or drinking, or most importantly, you can tell us who you would like us to interview as a guest on a future podcast. And you can subscribe to our new newsletter at zeit.de/allesgesagt. So before we start, there's a tradition in this podcast. Paul Auster, you are the only person who can end this podcast, this potentially infinite podcast, by choosing a stop word, the so-called Schlusswort in German. So if you drop this word, the podcast immediately ends. That's the secret of this podcast. So can you imagine a word you would say and then the podcast ends? Is something in mind?
And I have to tell you now, I have to announce it. It's not a surprise.
It's not a surprise, but the important thing is that it shouldn't be a word you would use, because otherwise, just by accident.
I could disqualify myself after a minute or two if I choose a common word. So let me think of something that I'd never say. But then, of course, I'll have to work it into my last sentence.
Exactly. That would be nice.
Here's the professional writer. So here's already thinking about the story.
All right. Here's a word. Torpor.
What's that?
Torpor. Torpor. You know what it means in English?
Okay.
It means great exhaustion. Torpor.
Okay.
So if I say torpor, I hope I remember. Otherwise, we'll be here for the next 3 days. But I'll try to remember torpor.
And don't mention the word again for the next 5 to 10 hours. And so, Christoph, do you want, so I'm not sure if you have to introduce Paul Auster, but you should introduce Paul Auster.
No, our guest needs no introduction. But first of all, I just want to say shout outs to our team, to Hannah Schraven and Vincent Mank, who helped us in preparing this conversation. Big thank you to the two people in our team. So just a few words about our guest. As Rainer and as Jochen have mentioned, he's one of the great American novelists, but he's so much more. He's a poet, a screenwriter, a writer of essays, a movie director, a translator, a husband of another great novelist. Some of you who are watching this podcast can actually read the name of his wife on his video screen, because it says Siri Hustvedt just below his picture. And he's also become a political activist in the last couple of years in his very own, very fascinating ways. His work has been translated into more than 40 languages. His books include literary milestones like the New York trilogy, of course, his debut, The Invention of Solitude, and many, many more. 4 years ago, he published the incredible novel 4321. And I remember when I was reading it for the first time, I was afraid, because even in the English version, I read the original version first, it had 900 plus pages. But then I really jumped into this world that he created. We're going to be talking about this book later on. And I never wanted to leave again. Actually, the German translation, I think, has 1,200 pages. So here we go with a complicated German language. His latest book in German was published by Rowohlt last fall. It's called Talking to Strangers, mit Fremden sprechen. And the last one in English hasn't come out in Germany yet. It's called Groundworks, Autobiographical Writings. And when I was preparing for this podcast, I tried to remember the first time I myself heard about the name Paul Auster. And I have to say, it wasn't the book, it wasn't a novel. But I was in my early 20s, and a friend of mine told me that he'd just seen a movie last weekend, and he wants to move to New York now because he saw this movie. And so he took me to the theater in Gießen, the university city of Gießen, and we went to see it. And then I wanted to move to New York as well. And of course, I'm talking about Smoke, which Paul Auster wrote the screenplay for. And we're going to be talking about this movie later on as well. It's starring a fabulous Harvey Keitel. And there's a follow-up movie to Smoke. Who hasn't seen that one, you have to watch it. It's called Blue in the Face. And it's really sort of a two-movie thing. It's sort of yeah, they really belong together. And in Blue in the Face stars Michael J. Fox in an enormous, incredible scene with Lou Reed talking about Brooklyn or New York, Jim Jarmusch, and Madonna as a singing telegram. So we've mentioned his wife, Siri Hustvedt. He's been married, they both have married for 40 years nearly. And so we have to ask about how you make, I mean, I'm always asking this question. So like how do you live a 40-year plus happy relationship? How do you make that? I'm really curious to find out. And as we've mentioned before, tomorrow he'll be celebrating his birthday with us. So this is the overture to his birthday party, I hope, in a way. Welcome. Thank you for taking your time for a little podcast.
Welcome. Thank you.
To Alles Gesagt, Mr. Paul Auster.
Thank you for having me. I've never been on an open-ended panel like this, and let's see where we go with it. Let's see what happens. Could
we start with politics? I thought it would be, so because there are all these interviews with you in the last weeks and months about US politics. So I think we have to finish this first to get it out of the way. And I was asking myself, when you, so I'm a news editor, so I have to consume all the news coming over from the US. And I was wondering all the time, and I'm really interested in how you see that. So many people think that we see an end with terror. So we saw an end with terror. It was terrible, but now there's an end. And what if this end was the beginning of something really terrible, which just started? What do you think? How will the future look like?
Are you talking about January 6th and what happened that day? Or yes?
Yeah, but so the change in US politics, the new administration just starting. And so to mention this person once, Donald Trump is away, and many people, at least in Germany, I think that's it. Now everything's fine again. And the interest, interestingly, in the US seems to drop a little bit because we think now we have peace there, everything's going the right way. Is that really true?
No, it's not true at all. And as I write to my friends, you know, three cheers that I generally don't like to use his name. I refer to him either as number 45.
I didn't dare to mention it in
or
you.
Fuckhead. It's either one, 45 or fuckhead. So I write, you know, three cheers that fuckhead is gone. Now roll up your sleeves and get ready to fight the battles ahead, because we're in the middle of something. We haven't finished. American history, as you study it, is a very complex business. And we've created, as all countries do, a lot of myths about ourselves. And most people seem to believe them. But from the very beginning, and this is even before the United States was a country, when it was still colonies under British control, it's a place of tremendous conflict, and it always has been, and tremendous violence. It's been from the very first days that the first settlers came here and started fighting Indians. We've been sort of steeped in blood in this country. And the country was set up in a way that was so hypocritical that these original flaws in how we constituted ourselves as a nation have continued to haunt us and impede what we all think of as a march toward more and more democracy, more and more equality. If you have your Declaration of Independence saying, all men are created equal, which is one of the fundamental ideas of the Enlightenment and one of the fundamental ideas of the formation of this country, and something that I suppose would be the very foundation of the idea of democracy. All men are created equal. But as Jefferson wrote that document when he was 26 years old, and he had in it a couple of paragraphs that were later deleted. And those paragraphs included accusations against the British king about the vile practice of slavery. And Jefferson blamed the British for having started it, and they wanted to get rid of it. On the other hand, the colonies in the South, and Jefferson himself was a slave owner, so it's not as if he was writing from some purely objective point of view. The Southern states did not want to join in the battle against England unless these paragraphs were struck from the document. So nothing is said about slavery. And so right there in the beginning, a kind of silent emendation, because very few people know about these paragraphs, we were off to a bad start, a start of hypocrisy, which when the war was over, and finally the confederation that was formed evolved into a federation of states. And we built the laws that founded this government, namely the Constitution. Slavery became embedded inside this document, because the Southern states, I'm sorry to lecture, but I think most people in Europe don't know about this. And it's just important to know that this is, so I'm taking my time, because the Southern states had a much smaller population than the Northern states. And they wanted to be represented more fully in the national, in the Congress and the Senate. So they made a bargain, and they said, we will count our slaves as 3/5 of a human being to increase our population. Not that these 3/5 beings have any rights, and they are not citizens, and they can't vote, and they can't do anything except work as slaves. So this is a pretty dark way to start a country, it seems to me. And this question of race has plagued us all through our history, the 25 years of this government as we know it. Okay, jumping ahead, the contradictions came to a head for the first time in the 1850s, and eventually led to a brutal civil war that lasted for 4 years. It was the first industrialized war in the history of mankind. The slaughter was immense. They're using machines that had never been used before in war. You know, cannons so powerful, long-range guns, all kinds of rifles, armored ships, all kinds of things that we now take for granted were used for the first time here during that horrible, horrible war. And then came a period following, of course, within days of the war's end, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by a pro-slavery Southerner. John Wilkes Booth, whose brother Edwin Booth was the most famous actor in the United States, by the way, someone of, you know, exalted reputation. Then came a period of what we called Reconstruction. And this started for real in 1868-69 when Grant became the president. And this was...
that was which number?
Well, he was elected in 68. He took power in 69. What number? He was number 17, actually, Grant. I know that. Because Lincoln was, no, he was 18. Johnson, Lincoln's vice president, was 17. Grant was 18.
I had a feeling you would even know this.
Yeah.
And I have to say, in parentheses, Grant, who was the general who led the Union Army, very complex man, someone I actually admire quite a bit. He was a military man who hated war, but he understood, you know, that they had to win. And so, and later in his life, he got sick with throat cancer, smoked a lot of cigars. He was dying, he was broke. And he wrote his autobiography, The Memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant, which is, I think, the greatest book ever written by a politician I've ever read. It's a wonderful book. And the publisher of that book was Mark Twain, who had his own publishing company. Yes. And he was so trying to help Grant that he gave Grant 70% royalties for the book. And then Grant died. He finished it and he died. Anyway, Grant really tried to bring equality to Black citizens of the South. And there was a period when, you know, there were Black congressmen, there were 2 Black senators, there were Black state representatives, there were, you know, a whole new way of being was put in place in the United States. But it had to be enforced. So federal troops were in the South for year after year after year. And of course, the South resented this. The South struck back. They formed the Ku Klux Klan. This happened right after the Civil War. And Black men who became farmers, for example, who got to own their own land, were often murdered by white vigilantes. They didn't want Black people becoming equal to them. It was an offense to their whole vision of the world. Their cosmology was destroyed once they were forced to legally accept the equality of Black people. I mean, the viciousness of all this is so profound and created such violence that, you know, we still feel the echoes of it today. So by 1876, the North was getting lazy. I don't think they really cared, because even in the North, nobody really cared about Black people. And they started to think it's too much of a drain on our funds. Why do we have to have all those troops there? Meantime, in the South, they were eating away at this and instituting laws in the Southern states that were preventing Black people from doing things. They were taking away the rights they had been granted. 1876 was a disputed election, the most hotly contested election in our history except for the one we've just had. It turned out that it was Tilden was the Democrat, Hayes was the Republican. Well, it turned out that neither one of them had a majority in the Electoral College, that stupid system that was set up as part of the Constitution. And so then it was thrown open to the Congress to decide. And they started making deals, and they started making deals. And the Democrats said, because the Democrats were the bad guys then. They were the pro-slavery party. The Republicans, that was Lincoln's party, they were more enlightened. But the Democrats said, we'll make a deal. We'll let Hayes be president if you stop Reconstruction. And so they did it. Hayes became president. All the rights that had been granted to Black citizens were taken away, bit by bit, in each one of the southern states, starting the period that is known as Jim Crow. You've heard of that.
Yes.
By 1896, there was a decision in the Supreme Court, Plessy versus Ferguson, in which segregation became the law of the land. All right. So now we're going into the 20th century.
Which number of the presidents are we at the moment?
Well, I've lost track by now.
We're heading into the 20th century now.
Yes, so many mediocre people who came and left, and the next mediocrity would take over.
30-somethings.
And it really stayed that way until the civil rights movement that got started in the 1950s. I'm telling you things you all know now. You know, this is more recent history. By the 1960s, the civil rights movement had become a big force in the country. I think television had a big part in it. When people saw the Southern sheriffs putting dogs on the Black protesters and shooting them with fire hoses, it was so shocking that the white public became aroused enough to try to do something. Lyndon Johnson, which is a parallel to social media in 2020, right? I mean, definitely.
Black Lives Matter movement.
These technologies have had an instrumental part in the development of both the right wing and the left wing developments in the United States. All right, so that's sort of a quick history of race relations in the country. So superficial that I'm almost embarrassed, but I just thought it's important to talk about this. All right, then let's move to another subject, Democrats and Republicans as we understand them now. When the United States entered into the Great Depression, beginning with the stock market crash in late 1929.
That was Roosevelt, right? Roosevelt?
Herbert Hoover was the president.
Okay.
Herbert Hoover, who became a one-term president. And then the Depression got very, very bad in the ensuing 2 or 3 years. And Hoover didn't know what to do. And so in 1932, there was the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he started what everyone is familiar with, the New Deal, which was a rethinking of what the federal government in the United States could do. Because previously, the states were controlling much of what happened locally, and there was no national plan. Roosevelt changed that. And it's not that Roosevelt was a radical. Roosevelt was a liberal-minded man, a fair-minded man of the center left, we might say. But this was a period of tremendous political agitation. There was so much pressure on him from the left, the socialists and the communists, and the threat of a real revolution was in the air. and he knew he had to do something. And so he did what he did. And he instituted a lot of the things that have become embedded in the daily life of Americans, things like Social Security, unemployment insurance, things of this sort. Since then, you see, since Roosevelt got in, the Republicans have tried to fight all this. And this is a battle that's been going on now for, well, it's 90 years, you see. I'm leading up to what we've just had because it didn't come out of nowhere. You see, this has been festering for a long, long time. The Republicans hated Roosevelt. If you grew up in a Republican household, Roosevelt's name was like talking about the devil. It was, you know, the worst human being that had ever lived.
Do you remember people talking about Roosevelt? I mean, you were born in the 40s, so that's
yes,
10
late
years
40s.
later.
But I had friends who grew up in Republican houses, and they would say, boy, my parents hate Roosevelt. They just think he's the worst thing. Whereas I grew up in a Democratic house, and Roosevelt was a near God to my mother and father. I mean, he was the savior of the country. And I think more people felt that way than the opposite. And so ever since then, the Republican position has been trying to more or less undo what Roosevelt did. It's trying to destroy the New Deal. And of course, after the Depression, or even before it was over, we were in World War II. And this was, you know, an enormous thing for America, of course, as it was for everybody. I know people tend to think, you know, the war was, you know, affected Europeans more than it did the Americans, or Asian people more than the Americans. But the fact is, no, because America was deeply involved. Once we got into the war, we were fighting on two fronts.
Yeah.
And, you know, over 400,000 soldiers lost their lives. I think something like 20 million people were in the armed forces in the United States. It was an entire national mobilization, this war. And once we came out of the war, of course, we seemed to be, you know, a very powerful, rich nation. And then the Cold War began. and the Republicans and Democrats seemed to agree mostly on foreign policy, but on domestic policy, no. And these battles kept going and going and going. There was Kennedy, another assassinated president, who wanted to embrace the civil rights movement and enact legislation, but he couldn't do it. He wasn't able to. His successor, Lyndon Johnson, who lives on as the man who, you know, carried on the war in Vietnam to disastrous consequences, but on domestic policy, he was probably the best president we've had since Roosevelt. And
Why?
nobody since.
Why is that? But why is that?
Well, because he got through the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These are the pillars of you know, modern liberalism in the United States. Johnson was a ferociously deft politician, and he was able to maneuver. You know, he would blackmail the senators that he, you know, George, I know about those little boys you like to sleep with. I mean, I could go to the press with this, or, you know, you could vote for my bill, or, you know, the other one. Well, I know you're not doing too well in your district there, but, you know, if we can arrange to have a bridge built in your county, it might help your election chances, but there won't be a bridge unless you know, vote for my bill. This is the way Johnson got things done. A backroom politician, but really, really good at it, you know. And I say, I admire this kind of thing, even though it's disgusting. It's admirable too. Anyway, The war, the Vietnam War, again, was the thing that tore us apart. And this is the thing that I lived through myself as a boy.
You were lucky because you didn't have to go to the war, right?
Well, I got lucky that I didn't go. If I had been called up, if I had been inducted into the army, I would have refused. I would have gone to prison. I thought about this was the big question of my young life: what to do, what to do. I knew people who ran away. You know, they went to Canada or they went to Europe. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll go to jail. I don't want to run away from it. But luckily, I didn't have to go, because at that last moment, they instituted a lottery for drafting young men up to the age of 26. And it was just completely arbitrary. And the lower your number, the greater the chance that you would be drafted. And they had 366 numbers, one for each possible birthday that people had. And I got number 297. And once that happened, I knew that I was clear. Nothing was going to happen to me. So I was lucky. But because of the war, you see, Richard Nixon got elected in 1968. And Nixon was the beginning of something. I mean, you had Goldwater running against Johnson in 64. Goldwater was so far to the right, it seemed as if he wasn't serious, and he lost by a tremendous number of votes. It was an absolute rout. So it seemed as if the right wing was defeated. And we on the left, as students in the 60s, you know, we thought we were on the ascendant. We thought that by protesting the war in Vietnam, by agitating for civil rights and equality for Black people, we were going to make a better country, a fairer, more just place. And we thought the power of our ideals and ideas would eventually triumph because they were humanly the right way to go. Little understanding throughout this entire period, and I'm talking about throughout the 60s, the right wing was organizing. They were getting more and more powerful. And there was a lot of money over there, you know, to support foundations, research things. And whereas the Democrats sort of played politics only when elections came, the Republicans did politics 365 days a year. It was full time. And after Nixon was discredited and resigned, you know, we went through a kind of strange period where Ford took over. You know, nobody remembers Gerald Ford much at all. Jimmy Carter was elected. And Jimmy Carter, to me, was a very inadequate president. A centrist Democrat from the South who was the first one who started, you know, deregulations and you know, of, you know, phone companies and airlines and so on. And the 70s also saw a shift in the economy away from, what shall I say, a more socially inspired view about economics, about fairness, into a more naked kind of capitalism. Again, stripping away what Roosevelt had done, stripping it little by little, stripping it away. So, which has led to a distorted economy that we have today, in which we have a very small number of very rich people and an ever-growing number of poor people who really can't live.
So Jochen, an hour ago, Jochen
I asked the question.
Asked you this question.
I just want to
exactly.
I'll wrap it up.
Take your time. Take your time.
No.
So, but where things changed, I mean, definitively was 40 years ago when Reagan was elected president. Reagan was actively telling the public that the government is bad, the government is your enemy, and we want to have a government so small that we could just flush it down the toilet eventually. And this rhetoric worked. Tens and tens of millions of people believed it. And so this view, which is I think, the antithesis of what America wanted to stand for at its best, has turned the Republican Party into a harsh ideological party of selfishness and greed, you see. And they become more and more aggressive. Reagan destroyed all the unions in the country. For example, I'll just use that as the one thing. And then even under Bill Clinton in the 90s, there was, remember, Newt Gingrich?
Oh, yes.
And he was the, politics as war politician who wanted to destroy everything, and he nearly succeeded.
He started the impeachment, right? I mean, he was behind the impeachment.
Well, among other things, but he shut down the government also. And these people are the presidents of the predecessors of everything we've been living through in the last years. All right, jumping farther ahead, after the two Bushes, and Clinton in between. Clinton was a Democrat, but the Republicans were in such ascendancy then. The right wing was so strong in the United States that Clinton, in effect, destroyed the Democratic Party in order to save it, or at least this is what he thought. He said the era of big government's over. We're not ever going to do this again. And Clinton, even his social policies were finally, I mean, it's ironic to say, they were to the right of Richard Nixon's. That the country had shifted so much in those 20, 25 years. Then when Obama was elected, which happened, recently, 2008, I was so happy. Siri was so happy. So all of our friends were so happy. We thought finally, we've done something good as a country. This has finally happened. And I didn't understand. I didn't understand how deeply racism was still entrenched in the American heart and the soul of this country. How many people were offended and nauseated by the idea of having a black man in the White House. Think about it, just the black man in the White House. And then the Republican Party, rather than sort of play by any kind of rules, sort of the standards of good governance, of respecting your opponent, having debates, but not declaring war every day against your opponents. They, I think, probably represented about 1/3 of the country, much more than I thought, maybe 40%. And then immediately the backlash started, and the Tea Party, remember the Tea Party, they formed, and by 2010, the right wing had won all the congressional seats, and Obama lost power. He didn't have control of the House or the Senate, and he couldn't do anything. For the last 6 years of his presidency, he was powerless. And I just kept thinking to myself, what they've done is they've taken the black guy, the nigger, they've tied him up, they've shoved a handkerchief down his throat, and they are beating him. They just kick him. They're kicking him every single day, insulting him and kicking him, and there you go. I mean, he couldn't really get anything done, and there we come to number 45, fuckhead himself, who was part of this charge. Now, this man, who's now the former president, is a man unlike any other we've ever had in office, but he didn't create this. I mean, if it had been to his advantage to espouse left-wing views, he would have done it. I mean, he doesn't believe in anything. He doesn't care. His only object is to aggrandize himself and to profit himself. So he'll shift with the wind. It was convenient for him to play along with the right wing. He is a racist. There's no question about it. But he was the one who started this thing, the birther movement. Remember, after Obama was elected, and he started saying, well, Obama wasn't born in the United States, and therefore he's not a natural born American. He can't be president.
And Obama didn't take it seriously when it started. No, he thought it was a joke and it would go away, right?
Exactly, and nobody took it seriously.
Nobody took it seriously.
This is the fascinating thing. Nobody, 0 people took it seriously. But he kept saying it. He kept saying it. You know, it's the big lie idea. The Germans perfected this, in a very dark moment in your history. And this is it. And you just say an outrageous thing. And at first people are shocked. Why would they say this? But then if you keep saying it and keep saying it, people begin to think, well, why would this, in this case, this rich man keep saying this unless there was some truth to it? By the time Obama finally acknowledged that it was a problem for him, when he finally produced his birth certificate to get rid of the problem, 40% of America believed that it was true. I think this proved to fuckhead that he had a big future in politics, and that if he just lied on a grand scale and lied consistently, he was gonna win. He would get somewhere. And so there he is.
He did, yeah.
He did, and he's the result of all this. But he's someone who's so ignorant as well as stupid, and yet so brilliant as a manipulator of crowds. I've never seen anyone with the devotion that he has inspired in his followers. I mean, he is a cult. He is Jesus Christ walking on water for this enormous battalion of tens of millions of people across the country.
Do you think he's going to make a political comeback?
I don't know. I mean, running for president again, too soon for me to say. I don't know. But I'll tell you that Trumpism is alive, and it is everywhere, and it is a very serious problem. He destroyed the Republican Party, whatever there was of it left, and now they've really been taken over by maniacs, people who are so crazy that I'm sure you've read about the things they're espousing. Democrats are Satanists, eating the blood of children, and these QAnon people. That the fires in California were caused by laser beams from outer space, manipulated by Jews. I mean, this is the level of discourse we have on the right wing right now. So if you have people who don't believe in democracy, which we understand now, and people who are so over the edge of sanity that you can't have a conversation with them, I don't see where this country's going. I don't know what's going to happen. Now, the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, not even a month ago, I think was the most horrible thing that's happened in the United States in our history since the beginning of the Civil War in 1861. Never before has there been an attempted coup. This was a mob going into the Capitol building, I think with a great number of them fully prepared to murder politicians inside and take over the government.
Yeah, incited by the president, incited by the
president, yeah. and declare that the election was invalid and that he had won, when in fact we know he didn't win. And this is the big lie again. You know, for 2.5 months, he just told the same lie until he got tens of millions of people supporting it, to such a degree that 2/3 of the Republicans in the House of Representatives voted to block the election. Now, this is insurrection. This is absolutely the breakdown of the government. We're not functioning anymore. Even, you know, there were quite a few senators also in that much smaller body that voted the same way. So I don't know what's going to happen. I think, you know, Biden is a decent fellow. He wasn't my first pick, but I understood after a while that he was the only possible person who could have beaten and won the election. And he's changed, and he's changed very much during the campaign. And his ideas are fine. And if he can get half of them done, or even 1/3 of them done, the country will be a better place. But he's going to have to play really tough. And he can't, you know, there's all this talk these days about, you know, working with the Republicans. It's not going to happen. The Democrats are going to have to go very hard and go alone. And I do believe that if some of these pieces of legislation are enacted, particularly the rescue plan that they have right now for the pandemic and for economic relief, I think people will begin to feel that it's working for them, and they'll feel a little better, maybe a little less anxious, a little less tense about everything. Maybe the political temperature will start to be lowered. This is a slow process, though, and things are happening so fast in other directions. I don't know if it's going to be enough, but as far as I can see, it's our only hope now, is to pass as much good progressive legislation as possible and see what happens, and keep fighting off the crazies, because they're crazy. and as you say, you can't negotiate with madmen, you know.
You told the story now, how the US got divided over hundreds of years. Do you think there's a story that could fix this? Is there a story that could unite the US again?
Well, I sometimes dream that it's not going to happen until we face up to everything we did in the past, until we actually deal head on, and by we, I mean white people, deal head on with the question of race and what has been done to our Black population in this country. There was a certain awakening this past summer. I felt that this was a positive step after the grotesque murder of George Floyd. The biggest wave of protests in the history of the country followed. And these were biracial protests. Millions and millions of white people took part in over 2,000 towns and cities across the country. This was good. This was unexpected for me, and certainly far surpassed anything that had happened in the 60s during the civil rights movement. How deep it goes, I don't know. We will see. We will see. It's hard to judge the exact state of the country during the pandemic, because we're not living under anything resembling normal circumstances right now. But once the pandemic is over, I'll be able to understand a bit more what's going on. I'm just not sure, but I think we need, you know, a national reckoning. We need to talk about these things. But of course, every time someone proposes this, the people on the right say, "Oh, these people hate America. They want to attack it. They want to destroy us." You know, the now former president, he got on this hobby horse right towards the end of his administration. Said, "We have to change all the textbooks. There can't be anything negative about the United States in any of the books that the children read." So, you know, I don't know if this is ever going to happen. They tried to do it in South Africa, you know, the reconciliation, but I don't know. I don't know. Truth and reconciliation, is it possible?
Do you think? What do you think?
Well, I mean to say, look, let's talk about Germany for a second. You belong to this country that, you know, was the pariah of the world, a government that in just 12 short years did more damage than anything we've ever known in human history.
Killed millions of people.
Tens of millions of people. And the fact is that after a slow start, after the war, I've been very impressed with how Germany has dealt with this past and recognized its responsibility for what happened. You know, so even something as symbolic as the Holocaust Museum is important. We don't have a slavery museum in the United States. We should have it. We don't have it. We've never recognized it. But you see, the German horror was really essentially just 12 years of a long, long history of your people. Whereas the question of slavery and treatment of Black people goes back 400 years to the very beginning of our country. And it's harder to extirpate it, you know, to get it out because it's so deeply embedded in us. That's what I'm afraid of.
I mean, I mean, I don't know if it's true, but I think I read it somewhere that when you grew up, for all these reasons you just described, your parents didn't even want German products in your house. I mean, Germany was like,
no Jew would buy a Mercedes, for example, or a Volkswagen, nor a Ford, because, you know, Henry Ford was a notorious anti-Semite, publicly anti-Semitic maniac. No, absolutely not.
Is there, so I remember an interview with you in ZEIT, where you mention a strong connection between education and racism. But is that so? If you are well-educated, so if you turn it around, if you are really well-educated, racism goes away. Is that?
Did I say that?
No, you didn't.
I would never say that. We know that education and intelligence can be used in very devious ways. I mean, I think people need to be told the truth about things. How they deal with it is another question. Children cannot be fed lies. That doesn't serve them very well. But I think knowing the story, if, you know, under ideal conditions, you know, can make you more compassionate about things. You know,
I tried to translate this because you said it in German, obviously. And so I tried to translate this. You say that democracy is more vulnerable if people are not well educated, something like that. Well,
it's true. You need an informed public. And we're seeing the consequences of that right now. You know, people don't even know what's going on. They're getting their information from sources that are telling them lies, and they believe the lies. So it's very, you can't have a democracy of people, of illiterate people. You can't have it. You can't.
And why does this work? I'm a journalist. I still do not get the mechanics behind this. So how is it possible, you mentioned it several times now, to tell big lies and people start believing this? You can watch Fox News or Stranger Things and people just consume it as a normal news program. How is that possible?
I don't know. I don't know. I can't explain it. I wish I could give you a simple answer. It just seems that people are very very vulnerable to persuasion. I mean, you can look at it in a more benign way. Look at advertising. You know, the great engine of the capitalist system. Advertising products. I mean, they're all pretty much the same. You know, you buy this car or that car, you use this soap or that soap. It's all the same stuff, basically. The advertisers want to persuade you that, you know, their product is better than all the others. You know, how could people be so stupid as to believe any of this? But they, you know, they attach certain almost, I don't know, emotional values to certain products, and people become very loyal to them. It's a strange thing. You know how, you know, the sneaker companies advertise their sneakers. So if you wear those sneakers, you're going to be cool, or you're going to be able to play basketball like Michael Jordan, or whatever.
Or is that not true? Is that not true? I always thought it would be true.
Oh, I thought, well, yeah, I guess it is true.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Or, you know, smoking in the old days, you know, smoking this cigarette is cooler than smoking that cigarette. I mean, you know, cigarettes are cigarettes, pretty much. I mean, some of them taste better than others, I suppose. But
you're smoking the e-cigarettes now.
I'm vaping, yes,
yeah,
an electronic cigarette. I had to give up real smoking about
you did
5 or 6 years ago. Yeah.
Oh,
I was simply coughing too much. But this is fine.
May I come back to the kind of lie thing? Isn't it about, so people tend to, so if they hear a good story, they start to believe the good story, even if it's not true?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I just know that, for example, when I was a little boy, I think I wrote about this. My teachers told me that America is the greatest country that has ever existed on the face of the earth. And you children are so lucky to be living here, to be growing up in this most exalted of places. You know, I believed it. I thought this, of course, is true. And then, you know, it takes a little while you have to get a little older before you can start thinking for yourself. But if it's so obvious that America is the greatest country, why do we have enemies? Why isn't everyone our friend then? Why are they yelling in Russia about how terrible we are and how they want to destroy us? If we're so good and perfect, then, so they have a different point of view. So maybe what my teachers are telling me is not exactly right. I don't know. You know, you begin to question things. Many people don't, I guess.
Yeah. There's an interesting aspect in Jochen's sort of the topic of lies and sort of how do we tell those stories and how do people believe in it. I came across this little anecdote in your life that when you didn't have to go to Vietnam, and you used to work for an organization in New York, and you were supposed to interview people in their houses.
Oh, it was the census.
Right.
I was a census taker in 1970.
Right. So
yes.
Apparently, please correct me if it's not true, but apparently people wouldn't open their houses. So you couldn't interview them. I mean, you were knocking on doors, right? And then you were really sort of sad about it, and you talked to someone from the organization. What am I going to do about it? And what did he tell you?
Well, this is the thing. I have to give the circumstances because this is important. It was in Harlem, you see. I had just finished Columbia University, which is very close to Harlem. And I needed a job. I knew that I was about to go off on an oil tanker. I had a job lined up in the Merchant Marine, but I didn't know when the ship would be coming. I just didn't know when I'd be called. And they told me, you know, it could take several months. So it's not happening tomorrow, and when it does happen, it's going to happen very fast. So just be ready. And so I thought, I have to do something. I need to make some money. And I became a census taker in Harlem. But we were a kind of what they call the crack team, you know, the follow-up team, because everyone is sent a form. Right. And you know, people fill out the form and they send it in.
Well, they don't.
These are the people who had not filled out the form.
Right.
And so we were sent into the neighborhood with our little red, white, and blue bags over our shoulders and all the forms inside there to go knock on doors and get people to fill them out with you. Fine. I thought it would be very interesting. They trained us for a few days about how to do this. And then we went out into the neighborhoods, and I would walk up these steps, these poor broken down buildings. I'd knock on the door. And I remember the first one that opened, it was a young guy, and I could see behind him a whole bunch of other young men sitting at tables, writing. And I think it was a numbers operation, you know, a gambling operation. And I said,
illegal, of course.
Illegal, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, he was probably just a few years older than I was. And he was a nice guy. He smiled at me. I said, hi, you know, I'm from the census. You know, can I come in and tell you? He said, I'm afraid we don't want any of that today. And he just closed the door on me. And the most moving experience, though, I have to say, was when I did get in. It was a very, very old woman. And she let me in, and I told her why I was there. And she said, please come in. We sat down. It was very dark in the room because I realized she was almost totally blind. And we were sitting there for a while, and she was answering questions. I mean, she was so old, her parents had been slaves. Imagine, right? This is 1970, or maybe her grandparents. She was probably about 90. Which means she was probably born in, 1890. Yes, her parents could have been slaves, possibly, but certainly her grandparents. And at one point she said, you know, I don't see very well, so I don't use much light, but if you want to turn on the light, you know, feel free. And there was a string hanging from a light fixture in the ceiling. I pulled the thing, and she peered out. She looked, and she looked, and she looked, and she said, why, you're not a black boy at all. And I said, no. She said, I thought so. You know, your voice didn't sound like a black boy. And then she said, you know, you're the first white person who's ever been in my house in my whole life.
Incredible.
I was so moved. And you know, it was that experience that inspired that little story that ends smoke.
Yes.
The blind woman.
Telling the story, yeah.
Yes. And thinking, yes, it was all inspired by that encounter. So anyway, it was very hot in New York then too. I mean, you know, it was summer and boiling, and walking these, you know, cement streets in Harlem and not getting anywhere. I went to the supervisor, who was a very slick guy. I remember, a black guy, but he had an ascot, and he had certain theatrical affectations. And,
suave.
Very suave, yes. Very, very, very good. And I said, you know, I'm really giving it all I've got. I can't get anywhere with this. And he said something like, you know, you're an educated boy, you know, use your imagination, you know, just because you knock on a door, it doesn't mean that someone isn't behind it, right? I said, right. I understood. See, he got paid for every form we handed in. So the more finished forms, the more money he made. So it was in his interest for us to do very well. And I suddenly understood what he was allowing me to do. And so I would just get forms and I'd sit at home and I'd make up families. But
how many?
I don't know. I didn't do that many, but for a few days I did this. And I write about it in the locked room in the New York trilogy. That's pretty much a true story. I use literary names. You know, I give families, you know, Melville and Hawthorne and things like that, or the names of characters from books. But, you know, I thought I was doing the right thing because the more people that could be counted, the more federal money would go to help Harlem. You see, there would be more aid for education, health, food, all kinds of benefits. So I made up big families, 10 people, 12 people, but it was based on a real experience that I had with one of the houses I was able to get into. I was in there, and I think 12 people lived in that apartment, and it wasn't a very big apartment. 12 people, and nobody was over the age of 23 or 24, and they were all related. I mean, it was a family. They were cousins and brothers and sisters, and there were little children, and they all took care of one another. I was so impressed. I thought, what an amazing, inventive way to live. And so if you can get 11 or 12 people in this apartment, why can't I put 11 or 12 in another apartment, you see? So I did it. And I suppose the statute of limitations has run out, and I probably can't go to jail for this.
No. We won't tell anyone in the US about it.
Thank you.
But what I'm trying to find out is like how how did Paul Auster become a writer? And so sometimes there are those moments, like, you know, those few days that you had at that time that kind of inspire you to come up with stories, or sort of just the idea of being able to tell stories. And correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't one of the first experiences of you thinking about owning a pen that you wanted an autograph from your baseball idol?
Yes. That's a joke, though, I have to say, even though I did start carrying a pencil or a pen with me afterwards. But no, I think I started writing early, and I don't know why. I can't explain it. I read books. Neither one of my parents was educated in a university. You know, they started working when they were very young, and they didn't have university educations. They didn't read books.
So there were no books. There were no books in your house.
A few, you know, but nothing much. My mother read a little bit. From time to time, my father would read something. Very rarely, though. But you know, there was a decent public library in our town, and I used to go. Starting, say, from the age of 8 or so on. You know, when I was old enough to just go off on my own and do things, I would go to the library and take out books and read them. And I think I can remember very well the first poem I tried to write. And I was 9 years old, and it was a Saturday, so there was no school. And it was the first very pretty day of spring, the first warm day, the first day when you could say to yourself, winter is really finished. And I remember I had nothing to do that day, nothing planned. And I got up early, and I just wanted a walk. And I went out, left the house and walked past my school. And then there was a little park there, and I was walking through the park, and there were birds jumping around, and everything smelled so good. And I I was so happy, you know, really in a kind of ecstatic state. And I said, oh, I have to write a poem about this. And I remember I walked on into the town and I bought myself a pen and a little notebook. And I came back to the park and I sat down and I wrote a poem about spring. I think it's probably the worst poem ever written by anybody. I mean, it was ridiculously stupid.
Do you remember any of the lines?
Yeah, I think the first lines was, I mean, it's not even as good as a greeting card, you know. Spring is here, give a great cheer, you know, this kind of thing. I mean, it was wretched, embarrassing, but it doesn't matter, because what I felt as I was writing that terrible poem and trying to write about what was around me, I felt more connected to the world than I'd ever felt at any time before that. Mm-hmm. The act of trying to write about what surrounded me made me feel part of it. Mm-hmm. And it was a really extraordinary feeling. And I think everything that I've ever done as a writer since has come out of that experience, that feeling of connectedness to nature around me, but other human beings, of course, too, and into the world in which I live. So that's how I became a writer, and I just kept doing it. I wrote more bad poems for, you know, and also stories that were always imitations of other people. You know, I didn't know what to write about. I wanted to write adventure stories like Robert Louis Stevenson. That was my idea of good writing.
What's your favorite story of Robert Louis Stevenson?
Oh, I don't know. I suppose Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I think I like that one very much. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I'd write stories that began, you know, like 18th century novels too. In the year of our Lord, 1751, I found myself in the middle of an enormous blizzard, trying to find my way back to my ancestral home. That would be the first sentence.
Not so bad.
Well, yeah, pretty bad. But I, you know, I had fun doing it. And then, you know, as I got a little older, I got a little more contemporary in my taste. And I remember when I was 12, I wrote something that I called a novel, but it was not a novel. It was just a long short story. But it's I don't know, it's probably 30 or 40 pages in my big child's handwriting. But it was such a labor for me. And it was a kind of detective story. And
what's the title?
I can't remember. I can't remember for the life of me. I know that it had something to do with two sets of twins and something about hiding a pearl necklace in the tube of a cylinder on a typewriter, you know, the
right. Yeah.
I don't remember anything more than that. But I gave it to my teacher. I said, here, I've written this thing. And he liked it. And he said, oh, this is very good. If you want to, every day at the end of school, you know, for 5 or 7 minutes, you can read a little bit of your story. And you keep going every day in installments until it's finished. And so I did it. And the kids seemed to like it. Probably because they didn't have to do the lesson anymore. And then, you know, I was a chance for them to relax. But nevertheless, I had this feeling that you can actually write something and share it with other people, and they might even enjoy it. So these were my early experiences of it. But again, it was only for fun. I never thought about a future doing this. And that didn't happen until I was around 15. And at 15, I was a very different person from the one I had been at 12, I can assure you.
What kind of person was the 15-year-old Paul Auster?
He was getting to be a very serious young man. And I remember I read Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky. And that book absolutely turned me upside down and inside out. And it changed my thinking about what books could be. And I remember when I put it down, I said, if that's what a novel is, if that's what a novel can do, I want to do it. That's how I want to spend my life.
And you were 15 at the time.
I was 15. I became committed to becoming a writer. I had many ups and downs and bumps along the way, but I never gave up the idea that that's what I was going to do.
But it took you many, many years to earn money by writing, right?
Many years.
Many years.
Yes.
So how did you survive the phase of where you couldn't get a publisher, didn't earn money? What kept you going there?
I don't know. I guess just some blind, stubborn will. I mean, to do it, because I felt that it was the only thing I'd been put on earth to do, and that come hell or high water, I was going to do it. So, you know, I struggled a lot. I was very poor, and I took all kinds of jobs. I did all kinds of crazy things to make money. And mostly, you know, after a certain period, I spent, during the years I was in college, my ambition had always been to be a novelist, but I was always writing poems also. And I embarked on a number of very big projects as a 18, 19, 20-year-old, far too difficult for someone that young. And so all these novels that I tried to write, I couldn't finish. I would get stuck. And so I have hundreds and hundreds of pages of work that I did then that is unpublishable, except certain things. And I'll explain in a bit. But I became so discouraged that I said, I'm never going to be able to write fiction, and I'm going to stick only to poetry. I'll just do that. Mm-hmm. And for years, that's all I did. I wasn't writing fiction. I wrote essays, but no attempt to write a novel. And I didn't even attempt to write a prose book until The Invention of Solitude, which happened. I started writing it after my father died very suddenly. But then it turned out that there were certain things in these early unpublished, unfinished, unrealized works that were interesting. And I started reading through all those old notebooks. I never even typed any of it up. It was just all handwritten in notebooks. And some of the elements of the New York trilogy were in there, especially of City of Glass. The whole idea of walking through the streets of a city and spelling out letters of the alphabet. That was something I came up with when I was about 20. Or the conversation about Don Quixote that's in that book. That was also written when I was, very, very young.
So how did you actually do this? I mean, you went back reading and then sort of
I'd pull out ideas, because the big book, the books that it's funny, because the things I was trying to write in college, I eventually did write. One of them was In the Country of Last Things. And then the other was a kind of combination of, I don't know, it's hard to explain it, of City of Glass and Moon Palace. Those two projects became two different projects. But in the beginning, they were sort of the same one. Mm. And so somehow the groundwork of those books was made when I was younger. And then, of course, I took certain things out, used them, rewrote them, of course, and then had many, many new ideas as well. But it was a combination of the old and the new, mostly new, but some old, but also the impulse and these characters had been born in me much earlier.
Hmm. Yeah. Can you remember the moment when you, for the first time, thought that you can make a living out of writing?
Yeah, I can remember. It was, and I was turning 40, for goodness sakes. And when I had finished writing Moon Palace.
Right.
And, you know, I had published, you know, 5 books by then, but I never made much money.
Okay.
But then my agent got a good contract for Moon Palace. And suddenly there was more money than I'd ever thought I'd ever earn as a writer. I mean, by today's standards, it wasn't that much.
Can you remember the sum?
I'm not going to say, but it was.
I didn't understand. How much was it?
It's a long time ago, but it would be interesting. Whatever. It took you so long to have the feeling that you can make a living.
Yes.
I mean, you're Paul Auster, right?
Yeah, but I was always Paul Auster, and nobody cared about that. And I think when you get down to it, how many people are in the world now? 8 billion, 7.5 billion. I would say about 99.9999% of those people don't care about me either. You know, I mean, you have to put yourself in perspective. I'm just one little dot in this big world of ours.
Now, you've just briefly mentioned the death of your father, the early death of your father, which I think played a very important role in your life for many different reasons. I mean, one of the reasons you just mentioned, I mean, you inherited some money that...
Yes, it saved my life. It's so curious that his sudden, unexpected death...
When he was 66.
Saved my life. He was 66, yeah. And he had never been sick. He was just always healthy. And he died of a heart attack. And that was that. And it was a real shock to me because I thought he'd lived to 90, 95. He was strong and always so healthy. Played tennis every single day. He could still beat me, you know, when he was in his 60s. So I don't know. Then I inherited some money. Again, by the standards of, you know, inheritances, it was very small, but it gave me some breathing room and allowed me the space to write these books, you see, which have been building up in me for all these years. And it made all the difference.
And sort of this early death of your father in some other ways kind of haunted you, right? Because when you were heading towards 66, you were like thinking about it.
I don't know what your stories are, the two of you, whether your fathers are still alive or not. They are. Yeah. Well, it's a strange thing to lose a parent. I mean, I've lost both my parents. My mother died, gosh, it's almost 19 years ago now. And my father died over 42 years ago now. It's crazy to think that. When you get to the age that your father was, especially if you're a boy, and you get to a point where you understand you're older than your father ever got to be. It was a very strange experience. And as if I kept feeling I've passed through an invisible curtain and I'm on the other side of another kind of reality now. I'm walking on territory that I never really thought I would be. It's not mine. What is this new world that I'm in? How can a boy be older than his father? It's not possible. And it was funny because I was 66 when I started writing 4321. And this is all just superstition. You know, my health is good. I'm fine. But I kept thinking, I'm going to drop dead. And there's nothing worse to me than the idea of trying to write this very, very big novel and dying in the middle and not being able to finish. It really inspired me to work hard, and I always work hard, but I worked like a maniac on that book. And normally, I think that kind of project, given the way I write, I thought it would take me 7 years to do it. But I actually wrote it in 3.5. But I was working all the time. 7 days a week. I never let up. Usually I take Sunday off and, you know, try to have a life also a little bit anyway. But no, I had no life but the book for those years.
And you were really exhausted, right? When you'd finished it.
Yes, I was. When I finished, I stood up from my desk and I nearly fell on the floor. I had to sort of lean against the wall because I was about to fall down. But yeah, it's emotional exhaustion as much as anything else.
Can you explain for all the 3 people who never read 4321 how it's structured? I think you're the best person who can explain this. Just in a minute, how does the book?
It's the story of one person's life from birth into towards the age of 20, early 20s. This one person is named Ferguson, Archie Ferguson. But what I do in the book is I tell 4 different versions of his story. Genetically, he's the same person. He has the same parents, but in one, you know, he lives in one town. In another, he lives in another town. In one, his father struggles to make a living. In another one, his father becomes successful. In another one, his father dies when he's young. And I tell these stories not sequentially, but in rotation. So the structure it's very simple. The first chapter is called 1.0, and that's the overture. It tells the story of Ferguson's parents, how they met, married, and the chapter ends with the birth of Archie Ferguson, who at that instant is the youngest person on the face of the earth. And then you have 1.1, which establishes Ferguson 1, and then 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and then 2.1, and there are seven cycles in the book. And we follow the different Archies who are the same boy but different through all these permutations of his life. It's not an autobiographical book, but what it shares with me are time and place. So Archie is born the same year I was, in the same city I was, lives in the same general area where I lived. And there are certain things about the family that resemble my family, but then again, not. And so it's not a picture of my mother and father. And all the characters are invented. I mean, I didn't take anybody from real life except one family who are minor characters. There are a few events from my life that I used, but again, they're not important. They're not the essential ones, except this. And this is the very heart of the book for me. As you probably know, because you're both so attentive to what I've been doing all these years, so I don't feel that I'm going to give you any surprises.
Sorry, not sorry.
When 14 years old, you know, I went through that experience of watching a boy killed by lightning next to me.
Yeah.
This was the important event of my life, I think.
How did that actually happen? Can you tell us?
Can we open a parenthesis? Can you just tell the story, because it's really important?
Yeah.
Yes, it really is important because it changed my life. And I was at a summer camp. I don't know. Do they have summer camps in Germany?
Yes.
Similar things.
Unfortunately, yes.
See, here, some of them are very nice. And, you know, you play sports and you do different things and you live with your people your age. But some of these camps, they can go on for 8 weeks. You know, it's the whole summer. And I used to be sent off for a whole summer. So the year I was 14, which was really the last year I did it.
And you were 15 when you wrote that, when you really got into the series writing thing. So it was just before.
Yes. Yeah, this happened before that. So anyway, mostly what we did was play basketball. I mean, we were all fanatic basketball players there, and baseball, and the counselors were all these cheerful guys in their early 20s who were, you know, college students, mostly from New York, and they didn't know anything about the woods or countryside. All they knew was, you know, basketball and baseball and how to tell jokes, and it was all very nice. But one day, one of the counselors said, you know, look, we're here in nature. We should take a day off from sports and go on a hike. That'll be fun. You know, we should, you know, take advantage of our environment here. So everyone thought this was a great idea. And off we went, about 20 boys and 2 or 3 of the counselors. And we didn't know where we were going. We're in the woods. We're blundering right and left, and you know, we got lost very quickly, and we had no idea where we were. And then it started to rain, and then it started to rain more, and then a really violent storm broke out on top of us. The sky was black, and it was lightning and thunder. It was very violent, really pelting rain, and just a ferocious uproar of the elements. And, you know, the lightning striking everywhere. You could see it. And we got a little scared. Someone said, well, the thing to do is we should get to a clearing, get away from the trees. The trees attract the lightning. That's true, actually. And so we looked around, we were blundering more through the rain and the lightning and the thunder. And we finally did find a clearing, a meadow. But in order to get into this meadow, we all had to crawl under a barbed wire fence. It was a farmer's fence. And we were in a single file. And one by one, the boys, I was somewhere in the middle of the line. And one by one, the boys were crawling through. The boy immediately in front of me, in other words, his feet were about, you know, this far from my fingertips. Suddenly, lightning, when he was directly under the barbed wire fence, lightning hit the fence and he stopped moving. I didn't know what had happened. It all happened so quickly, I wasn't sure. And I certainly didn't think he was dead. So, but he had stopped moving. So I remember crawling around him, getting through under the fence and through into the meadow. And then I pulled him with me into the clearing. As the storm went on, I mean, it kept going. I think it lasted for at least an hour and a half or 2. And it was fierce. I've never been in a storm like that. I kept trying to warm up his hands and bring him back. And none of the boys who were with me understood that he was dead either. You know, he said, well, we'll revive him. I remember one boy said, you know, we should hold down his tongue so he doesn't swallow it. All the while, his face was turning blue. The color of his face was changing. But I was so stupid. I was so ignorant of what death looked like that I didn't understand that he was dead. So eventually the storm stopped. Eventually we got back, and then it's only then that we found out, you know, what had really happened. He was taken to the hospital dead. And that experience taught me that anything can happen to anybody at any moment. That's the fundamental recognition of that moment. The ground I had been walking on as a boy up till that moment of 14 had been fairly solid. You know, I thought things went in a certain way and you could expect certain things to happen. But now I understood that I was completely wrong about everything, and the unexpected can charge into our lives at any instant. And I think I've lived with this knowledge since then, and it's very deep. It was almost like a religious experience about something about the truth of the world. Nature doesn't care about us at all. You know, we're just an element of nature. It's a blind force. And, you know, most of the time we're just in the way. And, you know, the lightning didn't care about the boy. The lightning was the lightning. He just happened to be in the wrong place. It's also absolutely arbitrary. And I think this is what my books are all about too, the unexpected, because that's it. That's the fundamental truth of everything.
Hmm.
Like, for example, when you got this phone call and someone asked you, is this Pinkerton?
The Pinkerton agency. Oh, that. Yes. Well, listen, that can happen to anybody. As I wrote, I think in one of those novels, maybe it was The Locked Room, stories happen to the people who are able to tell them. And that's true, because, you know, all these things are happening to people all the time. But if you're not aware of it, if you're not able to make connections, it's not a story. It's just, some guy called me and, geez, you know, wrong number again.
Mm-hmm.
But with this thing, I thought, he called twice, and he kept asking for the Pinkerton agency. I was busy. I was working on the invention of solitude. I said, sorry, wrong number, and I hung up.
And he called again the next day. He called again the next day.
He called the next day, and it was the same voice asking the same question. And then I hung up the second time, and I said, why did I do that? Why did I ask him what he wanted? I mean, why not play along a little bit? Find out what the case was, what he needed the detectives for. I kept waiting for the phone to ring a third time, but it never did.
Okay.
And that's when the idea to write City of Glass, as it opens, that's when I got the idea. What if the third call had come and I had pretended to be, well, not a Pinkerton agent, but the private eye, Paul Auster? Because I thought I want to stay true to the premise of this story, which somehow implicates me in the story. So I thought I should use my own name as part of it. And there we go. It all, that phone call started the book.
To come back to 4321, which may be the most, I think the most Austerian book you wrote, maybe, because you tell the different stories that of the same person developing totally different. Christoph is showing the book. So the basic idea is that your life could take totally different directions, and it's just chance what happens, and everything's possible. You can end up in London or somewhere else with your life. And that's the basic structure maybe of most of your books, isn't it? So it's always about, today you say the unexpected. It's about chance and randomness and coincidence.
Well, you see, yes, to some degree, but I just want to say that I just want to show that I believe that this is one of the crucial elements of life. But everything isn't random or by chance, in that I don't know your story. I don't know why you became a journalist, but something in you must have said at some point, I want to be a journalist. Otherwise you wouldn't be doing it now. You'd be doing something else. And are you still there? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. You seem to freeze in the
Yeah. Same here, but audio is fine.
Okay,
no freezing here, so we're fine.
Okay. So you made plans. This is all I want to say. You made plans, and you realize these plans by getting to the next stages that allowed you to do the thing you were preparing to do. This is normal because we do have will. We do have freedom of choice, and we can make decisions about who to marry, not to marry, you know, what job to have, what not to do, where to live, where not to live. And then what's interesting, though, is to me, is that you have your goal. You're on your road. You're walking towards becoming, say, a doctor. And then one fine day, as you're on that road, a tree falls in front of you. So you have to go off the road into the woods in order to continue. Well, then any number of things can or cannot happen. You get into the woods, and what if while you're there, you meet somebody who tells you something that's so astonishing that you decide, actually, I don't want to go back on that road. I want to go with this person deeper into the woods because there's something really interesting that's going to happen. Or you say, no, forget it. I'm getting back on that road no matter what. And you do, and you get back on. But your life is different, nevertheless. So this is what I would call the unexpected in a very mild way, you know, in a sort of abstract parable way. I'm very interested in the whole idea of accidents, just because, you know, philosophically, accident means that which is not necessary, right? And so much of what happens to us is not necessary. It's just, you know, a contingent fact. I guess the only necessary things are that we die, I suppose, and that's about it. That we need to eat and sleep and be kept warm, protected from the elements in order to live. But eventually, it's all going to end up in the grave.
Have you ever been approached by, I'm sure you have been approached by physicists talking with you, who wanted to talk with you about the fundamental structure of the universe, about chance, which is built into it?
No, not a single one. No.
Jochen is a physicist, so this is the first time.
But there's one really interesting thing about this. In quantum physics, there's fundamental chance. So that the tiny things in the universe, they're not decided what they do until you look at them. So there's an atom, and with an electron, for example, and as long as you don't measure, it's everywhere. I'm sure you have heard about this.
Oh, I have. I know a little bit about quantum physics.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is, so if you think about it, you can get really desperate and crazy thinking about quantum physics because in a way it doesn't make sense for the real world, what happens there. And there's one theory, which is just a theory, that every possibility on a quantum level definitely exists in another universe. You know, the atom decides when you look at it, what it does, but every possibility it takes is really taken, but just in another universe. And I think your books are as close as you can get to this idea of the many worlds that exist in parallel and just decide in every moment where they move, and you have creating infinite versions of the same universe and doing tiny different things, and at the end you are a writer or a physicist or a journalist. It's beautiful.
Well, thank you. I mean, but you see, you make it sound as if I'm writing science fiction, but I'm not. And all my books are very much grounded in social realities and the thisness of the world, and just the tangibility of human experience as well. They're not, I don't think of my books as abstract at all. It's just that I don't know what they are. In fact, I would be the last person to be able to explain what I do. It's all really ultimately instinct and intuition. And I just blunder ahead. I never really know what I'm doing exactly. And I don't want to pretend that I do, because it would be a lie. The fact is, every time I start a book, I think I have an idea of where I want it to go. And then I always wind up somewhere else. It never ends up being what I thought it would be at the beginning. Yeah.
Is it true that at some point in your life, you were sort of seriously thinking about becoming a film director, a movie director?
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Why didn't you go into that? I mean, sort of when you walked into these woods, you didn't.
Well, I think the problem was, and I was, maybe 19, 20 when I had this ambition. At the time, I was very, very shy. I could barely speak to other people, to strangers. And I certainly couldn't talk in front of a group. I could have very nice one-on-one conversations or just a few people, and I could be very talkative then. But somehow being with a lot of people or strange people made me very nervous and shy. And I thought, how can I direct movies if I can't talk? I have to be able to feel comfortable in front of other people. Otherwise, it would be stupid to try. And so it was because of that. But I never stopped loving movies. And the funny thing is that it was because I became a novelist that I got involved in making movies also.
So that's, I mean, I want to ask you about Laurel and Hardy.
Yes.
Because I'm such a big fan of Laurel and Hardy.
Oh,
I grew up with them. And so we're going to continue with the movie story in a bit, but just tell us, to everyone who, I mean, in Germany, you know what they're called in Germany? They have a different name.
Every country has different names for
them. Yeah. In Germany, embarrassingly enough, in Germany, they're called dick and doof.
Dick and doof. Yes, I've heard of that.
Yeah. So like really fat and stupid.
I think in Italy, they're called olio e l'olio or something like that.
Sounds much better than the German one. But what's so, and how did you discover Laurel and Hardy? Because they were famous in the 1930s first, right?
Well, here's the thing. If you remember in 4321, one of the Ferguson 3, who becomes, he writes a book, How Laurel and Hardy Saved My Life. And
that's you.
Well, no. But I'm saying that when I was a little boy, they started putting Laurel and Hardy films on television. Mm-hmm. See, because in the 1950s, TV was new and they didn't have a lot of programs. And so they were recycling a lot of old movies from the 30s and 40s. And there was a program after school, Laurel and Hardy, I think an hour every day for 5 days a week, you could see Laurel and Hardy films. So that's when I fell in love with them. And, people, there were, birthday parties, for example, and people had these, 16 millimeter projectors, some families did, and you could rent movies. And, I saw a number of Laurel and Hardy movies at birthday parties as well. So I became a great fan early on, and I still am a fan, I must say. And I had a wonderful experience a few years ago after the novel came out. There's a terrifically good new movie theater in New York called the Metrograph. Mm-hmm. And they show good films, little screens. It's down in the Lower East Side on Ludlow Street. And the man who runs it is a friend of mine. And I said, can we do a Laurel and Hardy night? I would like to present Laurel and Hardy films. So he helped me, and we picked three films, each one about 25, 30 minutes. So it was a nice program. But what was so great, he has all the right connections, and he got fully restored prints from, I think, University of California in LA, where they do restorations. And I've never seen Laurel and Hardy looking more glorious. on a big screen.
Wow.
In prints that looked as if they had been filmed the day before. And so I could see things in the expressions of their faces that I'd never been able to see in the the older versions that have come down to us. So it was an ecstatic experience. People were laughing their heads off too.
I mean, Laurel was the writer, right? He was the one.
He was the brains behind the whole thing.
Yeah.
He was the great comic thinker.
Why was he so good?
Well, I don't know why he was good.
Or in which way?
I do know that, he came to America at the same time as Charlie Chaplin. He was Charlie Chaplin's understudy when they came to the US, and they both stayed for reasons I don't understand. His name wasn't Stan Laurel. It was something like Arthur Jefferson. He changed his name. I think with him, it's a sense of timing. It's so uncannily perfect all the time. And he's not afraid of doing things slowly.
Mm-hmm.
And he knows that, one gag is not enough, that the first gag has to be followed by a second, and preferably a third. And he seemed to have that knack of inventing the right thing to happen. And so I don't know. We looked at a Laurel and Hardy movie not long ago. It really is great. It still holds up.
What's the, if you have never seen a Laurel and Hardy movie, what's the one I should go for first?
Well, I think the one to start with, I think is recognized as probably the greatest thing they did. It's called The Music Box.
Okay.
Which is they're two guys moving a piano up a flight of stairs. That's the whole movie. But
my favorite.
It has I don't know, the some tone of an absurdist play. I mean, you could imagine Beckett having written this thing.
Yes.
Almost. Yeah.
You've met Beckett, right?
Yeah, a few times. Yeah.
What was he like?
He was very kind to me, very nice. He was very shy, withdrawn kind of person, but kind. And we had a nice correspondence for years, and it meant a lot to me, I have to say. He had a big impact on me as a young person. His work, and later on, I mean, well after he was dead, I see, you wouldn't know about this in Germany, but in America, I put together his collected works for his 100th birthday in 2006. It was a big project, and I'm very glad because, unfortunately, in America, a lot of his books were, done by publishers that didn't have much money in the beginning. And they kept reprinting these editions that had lots of typographical errors, lots of faults, particularly the novels, the stories. And so I cleaned it all up, and the books are nice, and I was happy. And his nephew, Edward Beckett, who is the executor, was very much for me. He wanted me to do this, and he's been very kind to me, and so I'm grateful. I wanted to do it, and Grove Press is the publisher who published him here for years, and they did it, and it was a good experience. Yeah.
So going back to your movie career, because you've mentioned it briefly, the reason why in the end you became a movie director was because you'd become a novelist, a well-known novelist, and an editor of the op-ed pages of the New York Times asked you to write a Christmas story.
Right, that's it. It was 30 years ago, 1990, Christmas. And so I'd never written a short story since high school. And I'd never written anything that had been commissioned. And since then I haven't either. But I was very touched that he wanted me to do it. And he was very persuasive on the phone. And he said, I want something about New York, a story about New York. It took me a while to come up with the idea, but then I finally did. It was mostly about how there was a man I bought my cigars from. There's nothing to do with the Harvey Keitel character, but I liked him. We always had a nice talk whenever I was in the store, but he wasn't a friend. But what was he? It was this kind of relationship that you have in big cities with people who are part of your life.
The weak ties, right?
Yeah, it ties you to the neighborhood, I think, the community. So I wrote the story, and a filmmaker out in San Francisco read it, and he thought it had some potential to grow into a film. That person was Wayne Wang, and we eventually worked together and made it, and made another film right after also, which is improvised. You mentioned it earlier, Blue in the Face.
And Wayne Wang was so exhausted when you started working on the second one, on Blue in the Face, that you had to start directing, right? I mean,
Wayne got sick. Again, it was a very, very hot July, 100-degree temperatures in New York. What is that? 40 degrees centigrade, very humid. And we said, well, Paul can do it. And, you know, we did 3 days of shooting to begin with, very fast. And then we kind of put it away and worked on editing Smoke. And then when we finally turned our attention to the other movie, we put it together. We showed it to the, to the backers, and they said, really good, but think how much better would it be if you had 3 more days. So here it was now late October, and I remember that after that meeting, I ran home. It was a very exciting time. I ran home, and I sat down at my desk. And I wrote, in one day, I wrote 10 new scenes. Wow. And then I typed them all up and I faxed them. We were using fax machines then. And within 8 days, we were back in production. And we had to build the cigar store all over again. It had been dismantled. And we had to cast it. We had to get all these new people in, all within a matter of days. And because Harvey Keitel, who was essential to the project, was leaving for Europe, 10 days from the day of that meeting. And we had to do it in that time or else we weren't going to be able to do it. So though that second part, the actors often use the lines I wrote directly. But the first part was more improvised, but all along they were free to do whatever they wanted. It was just, we were working so fast that it was easier for them. So I remember Harvey, he wanted cue cards. And there was one scene, and all over the room were all the lines he's supposed to say, because he hadn't had time to study them. He was just reading the stuff off the wall, but it turned out just fine. And the conversation he was having with Vic Argo in the room, they weren't even in the room together.
Wow.
Because we filmed them on separate days. This is how you make movies. It's crazy sometimes, but it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
There are 2 other traditions in this podcast, and there's one tradition I just wanted to mention. Someone risked his life to deliver food to your doorstep today in the snowstorm. And I'm sure that many, many people who listen in are waiting that we eat something, because they traditionally eat with us when we do a live stream. So if you have something, and if you
I would like to start another tradition, is that I would like to get up and go to the toilet.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, it's
so a little toilet.
definitely.
We're used to that. We're used to that.
So
We're doing it all the time.
I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Okay.
Absolutely. Take your time.
Fetch the sandwiches.
Take your time. Take your time.
Christoph.
So, Jochen, ist es nicht großartig?
Ja.
Also wir können unseren Gast ja mal loben, weil er kann es eh nicht hören.
Wir reden ja nicht in Abwesenheit unserer Gäste über unsere Gäste, aber eigentlich dann doch meistens.
Nie.
Ja, was ich vor allem in der Vorbereitung wurde mir erst klar, ich habe heute Morgen noch ein paar Audioaufnahmen mit ihm gehört beim Laufen. Diese Paul Auster-Stimme ist natürlich auch noch ein Ding.
Die Stimme hilft.
Die Stimme ist natürlich unfassbar und ich kann nur empfehlen, 4321 auch mit seiner Stimme sich anzuhören. Ich habe das Buch gar nicht in weiten Teilen dann doch gelesen, aber es ist viel toller, wenn er das liest. Also da, was ja auch so eine Tendenz ist. Ich finde, ich könnte hier nur sitzen, es ist eigentlich fast egal, was er sagt, weil ich diese Stimme so toll finde.
Ja, stimmt. Sag mal, und Lea Bayer hat ja...
Lea, Grüße gehen raus.
Ja, also die hat ja, pass auf, also wir müssen es kurz erzählen, weil es ist ja wirklich, es ging ja damit los, dass Schneesturm jetzt ist in New York und sie hat in den letzten Tagen recherchiert, ein Deli, ein Restaurant in der Nähe von Paul Auster in Brooklyn, das seinen Lieblingsthunfisch herstellen kann.
Brooklyn Larder.
Ja.
Heißt das Ding.
Ja, wir haben so ein bisschen geholfen bei der Recherche und Lea war
ich glaube,
total
Christoph,
verzweifelt.
du hast ein bisschen geholfen bei der Recherche.
Ja, aber ich habe auch nur andere Menschen gefragt, die wiederum andere Menschen gefragt haben. Und dann war Lea so verzweifelt, weil sie schrieb dann heute Morgen, alle Geschäfte sind zu, alle Schulen sind zu. Das wird nicht
es gibt
geliefert.
eine verzweifelte E-Mail von Brooklyn Larder, die total nett schreiben, ja, hier ist alles zusammengebrochen. Wir machen gar nicht auf morgen. Ja. Also sorry, Lea, das mit dem Catering wird nichts. Ja. Und dann haben die heute Morgen ja auch noch gesümpft und sagen, ja, okay, wir improvisieren uns wie immer durch diesen Podcast. Und die Idee ist natürlich für alle, die zum ersten Mal zuhören oder sich fragen, wo sind wir überhaupt in diesem Livestream? Früher saßen wir am Tisch von Maria, an dem Küchentisch von Maria Lorenz, unserer Produzentin.
Da, wo wir auch wieder hinwollen.
Da wollen wir auch gerne wieder hin. Das geht im Moment nicht. Und dort haben wir natürlich immer mit unseren Gästinnen und Gästen gegessen. Und jetzt versuchen wir das zu recreaten, was gar nicht so einfach ist, weil wir jetzt natürlich auch angefangen haben, die Gelegenheit zu nutzen, Menschen, die weit weg sind, einzuladen. Deswegen versuchen wir so synchronisierte Caterings wie eben heute Thunfisch-Sandwich, Roastbeef-Sandwich, Kale Bowl, einerseits geliefert in Brooklyn, aber eben auch hier bei uns in Berlin. Maria, Christoph und ich haben auch so eine Tüte bekommen mit einem Originalnachbau von Paul Austers Essen. Ich hoffe, er ist es. Hi, Paul.
Hi.
Paul, what happened to your tuna sandwich? Do you still have it, or did you already ate it? Did you already
eat it before we started?
No, you did. Oh no.
We're always happy when we make our guests happy. That's all that, you know.
Okay, so on air, so to speak. Listen, I realize we've been going for more than 2 hours already.
We're just getting into it. We're just getting into it.
But I have to cut it off. I have other things to do today.
There's just one thing. We have a big tradition.
Last tradition before we stop this podcast.
Yes. So this tradition is the so-called A and B questionnaire.
Okay.
It's super fast. That's the concept.
Okay. Yes. And Jochen will be asking you. This. Yes. And Jochen is asking you these questions, and it's a very simple concept. So Jochen asks you a question.
It takes you 5 minutes, and then you can
something like cats or dogs, and you say, what would you say?
Okay, I'd explain it to you again. So the game is called A or B or next, and I read pairs of words, and you have to decide really quickly which word you want to choose. That's all.
Choose. For what purpose? Do we continue talking about that word or no?
No, it's just it's just applied brain research. There's a fast process in your brain, and if you have to decide really quickly, it's a special process that that's activated, and the idea is you don't think about it, you just choose the word. It's super simple. It's like, as Christoph mentioned, cat or dog, and you say dog.
Okay, I understand. I invented a game similar to that.
What's that?
My daughter, when she was little, and I used it in Lulu on the Bridge, another movie.
Yeah.
And it's just questions like this: are you a match or a cigarette lighter? Are you an owl or a hummingbird? You say you have to say. Okay, so I'm ready for your question.
Basically,
you're
basically, Jochen, we have to include these questions in the next
episode. It's recorded. It will happen.
Okay.
And one last thing: if you can't decide, you can say next.
Okay.
Okay. I have 70 questions.
All right.
And you can say next 7 times, and Christoph is counting. So we start. Please answer quickly. I start now. So, snooze or get up?
Snooze.
Heat or haste?
Haste.
Yes or maybe?
Maybe.
Sharing or having?
Sharing.
Beautiful or not beautiful?
Beautiful.
Mother or father?
Mother.
New or old?
Youth or old?
New or old?
I can't understand you. You are...
New or old?
New or old? New or old? New.
Future or past?
Past.
Order or chaos?
Order.
Chance or coincidence?
Chance.
Immortality or rebirth?
Next.
One.
To do or not to do?
To not to do.
Known or unknown?
Unknown.
Knowing or Googling?
Knowing.
Incense or open window?
Open window.
Inspiration or stimulation?
Stimulation.
Start or stop?
Start.
Money or no money?
No money.
Esoteric or ascetic?
Aesthetic.
In the morning or at night?
At night.
Utopia or apocalypse?
Utopia.
Gender neutral toilet or no toilet?
Gender neutral toilet.
Hoarder or Marie Kondo?
What?
Hoarder or Marie Kondo?
I just simply...
You can say next.
Okay, next. I couldn't understand it.
On or off?
On.
Mobile phone or no mobile phone?
No mobile phone.
TV or Netflix?
TV.
Reality or fiction?
Reality.
Fiction or metafiction?
Fiction.
Blue ink or black ink?
Black ink.
Pot-au-feu or coq au vin?
Pot-au-feu.
Croissant or baguette?
I like them both. Baguette.
Macaron or mousse au chocolat?
Mousse au chocolat.
Bagel or hot dog?
Hot dog.
Cheesecake or cupcake?
Cheesecake.
Greenwood or Prospect Park?
Prospect Park.
Organic or local?
Organic or local?
Yes.
Organic.
Welded organic cucumber or plastic-free normal cucumber?
Plastic-free cucumber.
Okay. Tea or coffee?
Tea.
First flush or second flush?
First flush or second flush? First.
Hot water or warm water?
Warm water.
Vegan sausage or no sausage?
Medium sausage.
Bordeaux or Burgundy?
Burgundy.
Cardinals or Mets? Cardinals or Mets?
Mets.
St. Louis Cardinals or New York Mets?
New York Mets. Okay. Mets.
Pitcher or catcher?
Pitcher.
Left fielder or right fielder?
Right fielder.
Reading or writing?
Writing.
Book or e-reader?
Book.
E-reader or no reading?
E-reader.
Authorial or personal?
Personal.
By names or by dates?
By names.
By names or by colors?
By colors.
Luke or Han?
Say it again.
Luke Skywalker or Han Solo?
Pass. I don't care about that.
So that's a next.
Okay,
Three.
that's a next. Bezos or Cook? Jeff Bezos or Tim Cook?
I don't know who Tim Cook is. Next.
Four.
Zuckerberg or Dorsey?
I don't know who Dorsey is either.
Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey?
I don't know who Dorsey is.
So next.
Five.
Okay. How many? I've done a lot now.
Five? Yeah.
4?
Christoph,
Five
how many?
next. Five.
Okay.
5.
Now it's getting Eggers or Franzen?
Next.
6.
Auster or Hustvedt?
Hustvedt.
Paul Benjamin or Paul Auster?
Paul Auster.
Sartre or de Beauvoir?
De Beauvoir.
Foucault or Derrida?
Derrida.
Thoreau or Emerson?
Thoreau.
Poe or Doyle?
Poe.
Poe or Joyce?
Joyce.
The Raven or To Helen?
To Helen.
Merkel or Macron?
Merkel.
Biden or Harris?
Biden.
Biden or Pelosi?
Pelosi.
Harris or Obama?
Obama.
Erdogan or Netanyahu?
Who's the first?
Erdogan or Netanyahu?
Erdogan. Ooh, I hate them both. Erdogan.
Xi Jinping or Putin?
Oh, Jesus.
Jochen,
Putin.
Trump or Putin?
Putin.
Thank you very much.
It. Thank you very much.
How bizarre.
Paul, just a question that I have to ask you, because we talked about Siri Hustvedt just in a second, and you gave the right answer. But I have to ask you this question. You have to ask this. You have to answer this question. You're the first readers of each other.
Yes.
What's your favorite book of your wife, and why?
I love them all. I have to say, I love them all. And I think each one is another world unto itself. And I love her essays as well, deeply.
Mm-hmm.
I think The Delusions of Certainty is one of the greatest works of philosophy that I've read. About the mind-body problem. But the book that I think about the most, the one that comes back to me the most, is What I Loved, the novel.
Why?
They're all great. I don't know. There's something so moving about it. There's a depth of emotion that comes through in ways that I think very few writers have been able to achieve. I love also the last 2 books, The Blazing World and Memories of the Future, deeply, deeply.
How about The Invisible Woman?
The Invisible Woman. She never wrote a book called The Invisible Woman.
Die unsichtbare Frau?
Oh, The Blindfold, maybe.
Oh, The Blindfold. Oh, yeah. And
no, that's great too. They're all great. But that's, I think that's her first. It's just the scope of what she's able to do now is much greater.
And you've been married for 40 years, and I'm a child of divorced parents, and I'm always trying to find out, how do you How do you have a 40-year-old happy relationship? How do you do that?
I don't know. I mean, far be it from me to give advice. I was married before I met Siri. I was divorced too. So I don't know. I don't know. We're just lucky. That's all. I really chalk it up to luck that we've managed to admire each other and get along all this time. It's not as if we don't have disagreements. It's not as though every day has been paradise. But I think we both understand, especially as we've aged and lived all this time together, that if we argue about something, it doesn't mean anything. It's not important, you know, you know, finally, the ability to express yourself with the other and not feel afraid to or censored if you do is something that creates, I don't know, a continuity in life. Siri is so much more astute about all these things than I am, but she talks about mechanical relationships and organic relationships. And she says that many, you know, romantic relationships, marriages, love affairs, whatever, are like machines, and they always do the same thing. The couple is always repeating what they did before. They get into this rut, and eventually a machine will wear out and just stop working. Whereas organic means it is continually changing and evolving. And she uses the example of a tree. Well, sometimes, you know, you'll have to cut a branch off of a tree in order to save the tree's life. And then the rest of the tree will be more vigorous. And I think it's a good metaphor, because obviously over 40 years, we've evolved enormously. And we're certainly not the children we were when we first knew each other. So I don't know. It's hard to imagine life without her now. And I think she probably feels the same way about me. It's weird. It's just inexplicable. And there was nothing preordained about it at all, but it just happens.
I was wondering how a typical day looks in your house with two writers. You have breakfast together and then go off for 10 hours and then you meet again on the couch watching movies, or?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, yeah, 10 hours might be a bit of an exaggeration, but I don't know, we're both working very intensely, and therefore we're both exhausted by the end and of the day. And then we pick up, you know, our everyday existence, our conjugal life. You know, we make dinner, we do this, we do that. We will often watch films because we're too tired to do anything else, mentally tired. I mean, working on a novel or in anything, any writing project is physically exhausting as well as mentally exhausting. So it's good to relax a bit, and then you're ready for the next day.
Jochen?
Because you're such a wonderful person, I just wanted to remind you that we never end this podcast. So we keep on asking you questions.
Yes, I know, but you see, the fact is that I'm getting tired, and this feeling comes over me from time to time, you know, of tremendous weariness, which I suppose can be described as torpor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been an amazing
pleasure and honor.
Yeah.
So have a nice day. Thank you for your time.
And
I'm sorry I couldn't give you more. I would have, but I can't.
No, it's fantastic. It was fantastic. And then have a great birthday tomorrow.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for being such good interlocutors. I enjoyed it tremendously.
Thank you so much.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you.